People always say the world is a strange place. I didn't truly understand that until I spent time working as a private investigator. It was roughly 5 years ago when I took on freelance PI work. And before you picture some slick action movie hero, I'll stop you right there. The reality is far less glamorous. Most of the job is sitting in a parked car, watching and writing things down. A lot of waiting. A lot of coffee. Television has done a remarkable job of making it look exciting. It isn't. But during my time doing that work, one case got under my skin. One case showed me just how dark certain people can become, and how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous. To protect her identity, I'll call her Maya. About 6 months into my freelance career, Maya came to me. She was sharp, driven, and fiercely independent. She had built her own company from the ground up with almost nothing to start with. She had pulled together a small group of investors who believed in her vision, and the business was growing fast. Among those investors was a man I'll call Marcus, someone she had known for years. They had actually met at a bar where Maya used to work. Marcus was one of her regulars. He was well-dressed, drove an expensive car, always picked up the tab without hesitation. He gave off the impression of a man who had more money than he knew what to do with. Over time, Marcus offered to invest in her business. Maya resisted. She had a rule about mixing money with personal relationships, and Marcus wasn't just an acquaintance. They had even gone on a couple of dates early on before agreeing they were better off as friends. But when her other investors hit a wall and the money started drying up, Maya faced a choice. Let the company she had poured everything into collapse, or accept Marcus's offer. She accepted, and almost immediately, things shifted. Marcus became obsessive. He called constantly, morning, afternoon, middle of the night. He sent texts in rapid-fire bursts. Maya saved all of it and showed me later. The volume was staggering. She didn't go to the police. She felt too guilty about the money to make waves. She thought if she just stayed calm, he'd eventually move on. He didn't. Whenever she went out on a date, Marcus would appear. One evening she was at a bar with someone she'd been seeing, and Marcus walked in, watched them for a while, and then walked over and struck the man in the face without a single word. The man was knocked unconscious. No charges were ever filed. Maya believed Marcus's wealth had something to do with that. This went on for months. She couldn't sleep. She was convinced he was lurking outside her apartment at night. She'd wake up and swear she could hear footsteps outside her bedroom window. Everywhere she drove, she'd spot what looked like his red pickup truck in traffic. Then, suddenly, he was gone. The call stopped. The truck disappeared. The footsteps outside the window went silent. Maya slowly rebuilt her life. Her business took off. She moved to a new home. She started dating again without looking over her shoulder. For 2 full years, no Marcus. Eventually, she decided she wanted to find him, not because she missed him, but because she wanted to pay back every dollar he'd invested and sever that connection forever. She tried his old number. Disconnected. She searched social media. Nothing. She went back to the bar where they met and asked around. Nobody had seen him in years. He had simply vanished. And then, one night, someone knocked on her door. It was past midnight. Maya looked through the window near the front door and saw a tall figure in a dark hoodie standing on her porch. Her gut told her immediately who it was. She didn't answer. The figure stood there for nearly 20 minutes before finally walking away into the darkness. The next morning, she called me. If you think what Maya found at her door was disturbing, wait until you hear what I found hidden in the woods behind her house. That's coming up next in part 2. Maya didn't want games. She didn't want drama. She wanted Marcus found, the debt repaid, and her life back. As I began digging into Marcus's background, things got strange fast. His real name wasn't Marcus. The identity he'd used with Maya was an alias. When I traced his financial history, I couldn't find any clear source of wealth. What I did find was a pattern. He had played a similar role in at least 2 other towns, using different names, presenting himself as a wealthy benefactor, targeting women with ambition and dreams. And then, in every case, the trail went completely cold around the same time he disappeared from Maya's life. Every alias, every known address, every phone number, all silent. I was still piecing this together when the knocking at Maya's door happened again, right in the middle of my investigation. She called me immediately. By the time I arrived, whoever had been there was gone. I walked the perimeter of her property and the surrounding area, careful not to go too far in case the visitor returned. Over the next several nights, I staked out the front of her home, parked in the dark, watching. Then, at 2 in the morning on the 3rd night, a knock at her door. I stepped out of my car. The hooded figure spotted me before I could get close. He bolted, and I mean he ran, fast, but I managed to keep him in sight long enough to see him disappear into a heavily wooded area behind the neighborhood. I didn't follow him into the dark that night. I went back to Maya, confirmed she was safe, and told her to stay with family until I had answers. At first light, I went into the woods. After just a few minutes of walking, I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. There was a makeshift shelter built into the trees. Small, crude, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I approached slowly and opened the door. The smell that hit me was overwhelming. Stale, sour, and thick. Someone had been living there, and not recently bathed. Scattered across the floor were food wrappers, crushed soda cans, and emptied beer containers. But none of that was what made my stomach drop. In the corner of that shelter sat a wheelchair, and in that wheelchair sat a mannequin. The mannequin's head was damaged, dented on one side, with makeup applied to the face, and a blonde wig placed carefully on top. In its lap was a photograph of Marcus and Maya, taken back when she was still working at the bar. He had built a version of her, in the woods, behind her house. I stepped outside and called the police immediately. Officers arrived and quietly moved into the area. They hadn't been there long when the hooded figure returned to the shelter. When they knocked on the door, the man inside erupted. He lunged at one of the officers, but they had him subdued in seconds. It was Marcus. No one knew how long he had been out there, living in the woods, watching her house, waiting. It's a thought I still haven't fully shaken. That was the story of Maya and Marcus. But the next story is one that hits differently, because this time, the person who made the dangerous mistake was the one hiring the PI. Stick around for part 3. I'll be the first to admit, I've never been great at resisting bad ideas. When someone dares me or pushes me towards something, I've historically been terrible at saying no. It got me into all kinds of trouble when I was younger. I once got expelled from high school because someone dared me to try to steal the principal's car. I did it. I don't recommend it. This weakness followed me into adulthood. A few years ago, I became convinced my fiancée was cheating on me. Not because she gave me any real reason to think so, but because I let paranoid thoughts take hold and then made the mistake of talking to certain friends about it. Instead of telling me to sit down and have a conversation with her like a functioning adult, they poured fuel on the fire. They told me if I felt it, it was probably real. Within a few days, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I could barely hold a conversation without my mind drifting back to the suspicion. One friend suggested I hire a private investigator. I didn't even know that was something regular people did. I thought PIs only existed in detective movies from the 70s. But here I was, taking the suggestion seriously, and then doing something truly foolish. I searched for a private investigator on Craigslist. I didn't know if hiring someone to follow my fiancée was even legal, so I figured Craigslist was where you went for things that existed in legal gray areas. After a short search, I found the only listing near my location and reached out. The man's name was Shane. We exchanged a few messages and agreed to meet at a park near my house. His suggestion. On the drive over, I felt disgusted with myself. But the paranoia was louder than my better judgment. Shane was not what I expected. He was tall, heavy-set, and dressed in worn-out sweatpants. Standing next to him was a woman he introduced as Gabby, his girlfriend and, apparently, his partner. She looked equally out of place. Before I could say anything, Shane acknowledged the obvious. He explained that looking unremarkable was intentional. Blending in was part of the job. The explanation made enough sense that I let it go. We sat at a picnic table, and he started asking questions. Home address, place of work, daily routine. Normal enough at first, then the questions shifted. They became oddly personal, invasive even, things that didn't seem to have any connection to what I was actually asking for. But I answered them all, because I was an idiot who had already committed to the bit. We agreed on a price. He wanted cash. Off the books, he said. I handed it over, and he told me he'd be in touch. A week went by. Silence. I sent messages. No response. I was almost certain I'd been scammed. Then, at 1:16 in the morning, a text from an unknown number. It was Shane. New phone, he said. He told me he had critical information. Couldn't wait until morning. He needed to meet me right now. My fiancée was asleep right beside me. She'd been home with me all day. None of this added up. But Shane was insistent, so I quietly got dressed and drove to the address he sent me. The house was dark. It looked like nobody had been inside it in months. I texted the number. No answer. I called. Nothing. Then a message. Doors open. I asked him to come outside. He told me to just walk in. The door was unlocked. I walked in. The inside was pitch black. I called out. Nothing. Then another message. Sorry, I forgot to mention, we're in the basement. Our office is down here. Take the far left door. I stood at the top of those stairs and looked down into complete darkness. No light. No sound. No office. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. And finally, I listened. I walked back out, got in my car, and drove away. A few minutes later, one last message came through from the number. Good for you, buddy. Take care now. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, the number was disconnected. The Craigslist listing was gone. Shane and Gabby, whoever they really were, had vanished. For months afterward, I couldn't relax in my own home. Shane knew my address. He knew where I worked. Every sound at night put me on edge. Eventually, I told my fiancée everything. She was hurt that I'd suspected her, but she wasn't going anywhere. We worked through it, moved to a new place, and I finally started to breathe again. I never reported it to the police. That was another mistake. If Shane and Gabby are still running that scheme somewhere, I'm sorry for whoever walks into that house next. 2 stories down. 1 left, and this final one is the only story told from the perspective of the person being investigated. What she discovered about the man following her will stay with you. Part 4 is next. The year 2020 was rough for everyone. For me, it came with a specific kind of loneliness. In February of that year, I relocated for a new job, 8 hours from my hometown. I had barely settled in when everything shut down. No coworkers to meet. No neighbors to wave to. No sense of the city yet. Just me, an apartment I barely knew, and a lot of silence. After a few months of that, I decided I needed to find some way to connect with the world outside my walls. I downloaded a couple of dating apps. I want to be clear, I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted to remind myself that other human beings existed. Over the next several months, I went on a handful of dates. Nothing came of any of them. The men were perfectly decent people, but we weren't compatible. Most of them seemed to be looking for something more committed than I was ready to offer. Then I matched with someone I'll call Wade. On paper, Wade was everything you'd put on a list. Smart, charming, easy to talk to, easy on the eyes. But something about him felt off in a way I couldn't explain. Just a vague, persistent unease every time we were together. I tried to push past it. We went on several dates. I genuinely gave it a chance. It didn't work. The spark simply wasn't there. I came to the conclusion, privately, that Wade probably felt the same way. We stopped texting as much, and then not at all. No dramatic ending. We just faded out. I moved on. I even started making a few friends in the area, which helped. A few weeks after things ended with Wade, I signed up to try a first date with someone else. A guy named Paul who seemed genuinely warm and a little funny in exactly the right way. That's when I noticed the gray SUV. It showed up outside my house one evening. Dark tinted windows. I didn't recognize it. I told myself it was nothing. A visitor for one of my neighbors, probably. But it was there the next night. And the night after that. I started paying closer attention to the cars on my street. Nobody seemed to have a new SUV. That weekend, I went to the grocery store. While I was shopping, I had that crawling feeling, the one that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, that someone was watching me. The store was busy enough that I couldn't identify anyone specific. When I walked out to the parking lot, the gray SUV was parked directly next to my car. I loaded my bags quickly and drove out past the front of the store. A tall man with slick back hair and sunglasses was standing near the entrance, facing my direction. I told myself it was a coincidence. I drove to meet Paul and tried to shake it off. Our date was going well. Better than well, actually. I felt comfortable with him in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. Then I glanced out the window of the coffee shop. The gray SUV was parked across the street. I scanned the room without making it obvious. And there, in the corner near the door, was the tall man with the slick back hair. Eyes down, phone in hand, but there. This was not a coincidence. I made up an excuse, said my goodbyes to Paul, and took a different route home. It didn't matter. Within minutes, the SUV appeared in my rearview mirror. I drove in circles until I lost it, then went home. That evening, I texted Paul and explained what had been happening. He was understanding, and he urged me to call the police. I did. The officers approached the SUV parked outside my house. I watched from my living room window. The tall man got out calmly, spoke to the officers without any visible agitation, and produced something from inside his jacket. The officers knocked on my door. The man in the SUV, they told me, was a licensed private investigator. Someone had hired him to follow me. Who hired a PI to surveil a woman who barely knew anyone in her new city? And what happened when the person behind it revealed themselves? The answer is darker than you'd expect. Don't go anywhere. Part 5 is the conclusion. I stood in my doorway processing what the officers had just told me. A private investigator. Someone had paid a professional to follow me. The police said they couldn't compel him to reveal who had hired him. He wasn't breaking any laws by sitting outside my house. They told me to document anything else suspicious and contact them if the situation escalated. Then they left. I went outside to confront the man directly, but the SUV was already gone. The next few days were brutal. The SUV never came back. But the feeling of being watched, that low-level paranoia, didn't go away just because the car did. It burrowed in and stayed. Not knowing who had commissioned that surveillance was almost worse than seeing the vehicle outside my window. At least then I knew where the threat was. I tried to keep living my life. Paul and I kept in touch. He was patient and didn't push me on any of it. A few weeks later, we decided to go on a hike at a state park nearby. A normal, peaceful, good faith attempt at a real second date. About halfway through the trail, I noticed we'd both gone quiet. Paul kept glancing over his shoulder into the trees. I was doing the same thing without realizing it. I made a joke about it. I said it was probably just another private investigator trying to get what the last one couldn't. Paul laughed. I laughed. We kept walking. When we got back to the parking lot, Paul went to use the restroom. I leaned against a railing, scrolling through my phone. Then I heard footsteps, fast, heavy ones, and I looked up just in time to see a man sprinting out of the tree line. It was Wade. He grabbed my arm. He was talking in a rush, telling me we were leaving, that I had been unfaithful, that he was willing to forgive me, that I just needed to come with him. His grip was hard. I started screaming. Paul heard me from inside the restroom and came running. He tackled Wade to the ground. Wade got up and started making threats, at Paul, at me. But Paul didn't flinch. He stood his ground, and Wade slowly backed off, his eyes still locked on both of us as he retreated. We ran to Paul's car. I called the police before the door was even shut. At first, the officer said there wasn't much they could do. No prior restraining order. No official documentation of a relationship. It was his word against ours. But then the case took an unexpected turn. The private investigator, the same man I'd called the police on weeks earlier, had apparently grown deeply uncomfortable during the course of his surveillance. He told investigators that he had been hired by Wade under the pretense that I was his girlfriend and that he suspected I was being unfaithful. But the more the PI watched me, the more obvious it became that there was no relationship. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't seeing anyone behind anyone's back. I was just living my life. The investigator said he had warned Wade to walk away. Wade didn't listen. When law enforcement reached out to him after the incident at the park, the PI told him everything and stated clearly that in his professional opinion, Wade posed a genuine threat. That was enough to get a restraining order. Wade deleted all his social media accounts and dropped off the grid not long after. I haven't heard from him since. But I think about it, sometimes I barely knew this man. We went on a handful of dates, and yet he hired someone to follow me, stalk me through a state park, and grab me in a parking lot in broad daylight. Paul was there that day. I'm grateful he was. If he hadn't been, I don't let myself finish that thought very often. But the answer scares me. These 3 stories are reminders that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears the face of an old friend, sometimes it sits across from you at a picnic table, and sometimes it's parked quietly outside your house, waiting. Stay aware, trust your gut, and be careful.